want to talk about the core theme of this conference, which is future cities. So I want to talk about the design of cities almost from their beginning. And I also want to talk about sustainable vertical urbanism from the perspective of people. How do we actually engage in all of that? So what I'm doing is going to tell you a story. It's going to be very anecdotal, but it's going to be a story which is about how one might start to think about the way in which we design cities, but actually the process of it. How do we actually engender a sense of community? How do we engender a sense of commitment? And through that, we think about the designers and the team that you bring together to achieve that. And as a result of that, I've called this talk Vertical Reality. It's about the vertical urbanism, but it's about getting reality into it, making places authentic. And I summarized this in the abstract to the paper, which was pretty much that the technical design of tall buildings is straightforward. All right, we've heard how complicated it is in terms of buildings that are up to 800 meters, but in a way, that can all be handled. The key thing for us, the real challenge, is how to create successful high-rise urbanism that forms an authentic city, a place that people want to live. So if we start from the beginning, I think it's fair to say that inherently we are ground dwellers. We don't naturally live in trees. We actually inhabit the ground. So our senses are tuned to being horizontal. And therefore, the idea of living vertically is something that we need to think about. And we need to think about how do we actually make vertical urbanism real for people who actually inherently want to be at low level. And of course, the case for vertical urbanism is straightforward, really. We see this graph of population growing. Population's doubled between 1960 and 2000, and in theory, it's just going to carry on. So there is no doubt in my mind that vertical urbanism is the way forward. It's the way in which we can address growing population demands. But the question is how do you do that? So here's a city, here's Los Angeles, and it's a sprawl. Now, Los Angeles has its character. We all know it's a great place to visit. But ultimately, if you look at it, it's spread out, and it takes a long while to get from one place to the other. And we see this in this classic graph, which I'm sure you've seen before, which is all about the impact of density and transport-related energy. And I'm also going to go throw time into that equation as well. So it's not just about the energy that's used about moving around, it's the time people take to do that. And what we see is that in the US cities in particular, you see that there's a high amount of energy that's used in terms of cities. Australasia starts to mellow out. Europe's not bad. But then when you go especially off towards Hong Kong and density increases, less energy, less time moving around the city. And that's good. So actually, Seattle, that's a good city. I chose that because it's also in North America. But the idea of a compact city centre, an identifiable city centre that people can relate to is good. And that's really positive. And this is a great example of that, set in a beautiful place as well. So I'm arguing that designers tend to concentrate on fabric. What we mean by that is the spaces and building, and they concentrate on the geography. How do we relate to a river or a mountain or a place? But what we tend to do is to stop at that point and just hope that people are going to come and have a good time and it's all going to be successful. What we're not really doing is designing properly and inherently for people, the culture, the history. And in particular, how do we design for those in a vertical urbanism, a new vertical urbanism? So in a way, we need to think about what people are and who people are. And this is great. So this is Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan's been going for years, and he's still as popular as ever, and he's popular to more people than ever before. And I'm arguing that we're all younger for longer. We all pride ourselves on wanting to be younger until we die. And in a way, what we're dealing now with is a much more intergenerational and arguably plural society. So there's Bob Dylan in the 60s, and here he is in the 2000s, still looking good, still delivering. And the other thing that we need to remember is social media and the internet and the way in which digital technology is transforming the way we interact. Everything's much more immediate. I have to go and tell what's happening now. Someone around the world is knowing what's happening in this room because someone's tweeting it. And that immediacy, that access to immediacy, is inevitably changing the way in which we interact. And we need to be aware of that. And as a result of that, there's a merger a merger of living and commerce and leisure spaces. And public space really is the cement which actually glues our cities together. It's the place where the city and the citizen become one. And public space is really, really important in cities. We know that, but when we're thinking about future cities and sustainable vertical urbanism, we must not forget the role that public space has in there. And that public space needs to be soft. And when I talk about soft, it just means it needs to be multi-purpose. So there's Central Park in the winter, great ice rink. There it is in the summer, it's a fun fair. The idea that we create spaces that are adaptable, can change either through the day, through the year, and over long periods of time is crucial to the success of future vertical urbanism. And what I want to do is to talk about two projects that we did. One was in Bangalore, India. The other one was in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. And really, these were two future cities. These were starting from scratch. Malaysia has a track record of doing this. Bangalore is really interesting, as I'll go on. And what we really wanted to do was to marry technology with anthropology being the key thing. And what we did, the way we did that was we started from first principles, and we thought about the team that would engage with us to generate that building. We generated a think tank. And the think tank was there to offer ideas that were outside of the typical urban planning and building design discourse. And these guys here are the inventors of the transistor. And the point I'm trying to get to here is serendipity, the idea that great things can happen if you bring diversity into it, and interesting things happen. So what we did was we created a think tank, and it had a science fiction filmmaker and an illustrator, computer games designer, the guys that are designing SimCity and all this sort of thing. They have a fascinating insight on the way in which people in the future will work. Anthropologist, a professor at Cambridge University helped us. Astronomer, he was brilliant because his view was how do we think about the world and looking from outside. Futurists and environmentalists, communication strategists, all the people who are dealing with all of the issues that people have to deal with in their daily life, and how do we think about what that means for us as designers. And the diagram worked that we had the traditional design team, we had the engineers, the architects, the designers, the commercial advisors, the cost planners, the building advisors. We obviously had the client over here, but we had this think tank, and we had the think tank which were there to generate things, to provoke us into different ways of thinking. And those guys in the think tank, in theory, professionally projected themselves into the future, be it for Marvel Comics, be it for a sci-fi film, be it for a computer games designer, or be it an anthropologist thinking about the way in which they educate people. And what they did was they generated a few key questions. Now, some of them are obvious. You know, a city's identity, life, and principal activities, are they as important as the buildings and spaces? And what that's trying to say is actually maybe a city's purpose is more important than what it actually is in tangible terms. How soft, we talked about that, how soft should they be? How soft should public space be? How malleable should it be? Everyday activities and experiences are key to making places real. The point is you need to be able to interact with your family and friends. If you don't do that, you've failed. Social and digital media, how will that transform the way people react in an urban environment? Is meeting places, going to a cafe, are they really going to be sustainable in the future? And can future urbanism actually be real and virtual at the same time? What I mean by that is extending the definition of a city beyond its physical constraints and turning it into something which is a virtual platform. And also just thinking about how precious human and natural resources are. So what we did was that we eventually ended up with that changing the way our brief was brought together. So we defined two future cities in terms of their purpose and let the architecture follow. That was the important thing. And we designed those to appeal to both permanent residents and visitors as well. So it's important to understand the different type of people who come in. And really, we created a manifesto then. We wanted a global place so that everyone knew about it. We wanted it to be a place where things happen at the forefront of innovation. We wanted it to be inspirational, and we also wanted it to be an exemplar. These cities need to be exemplar. People would use them as reference points to continue in vertical urbanism. So we thought about interaction. We thought about the way in which people's lives are changing, that idea of immediacy, the way in which people need to show and share things the moment they see it, and the way in which that changes the way in which buildings could be. We also thought about adaptability, and there's some work that's been done at Loughborough University called the Futures Research Group, and they were brilliant because what they were doing was talking about the way in which we need to think about the way buildings should be designed to change. And the idea of a long life, loose fit approach is great. So actually, we think about a chassis of a car, that's the basic superstructure, and then we allow for different bodies, different things, different layers to be added to that chassis. And we needed to think about the extraordinary and the normal, the idea that places can be places to visit, and they're amazing, and they should also be the places where you live, and they're normal, and they're ordinary, and getting that balance right is critical. So what we ended up with was 2 cities, real and virtual, and the qualities of the real environment were obviously attaining a high quality of life, looking for educational excellence, engendering that sense of serendipity, the places where things happen happily. The idea of intellectual capital being the primary export rather than products and things, the idea that that's the resource, that's the export of those places, and also to think about extending citizenship. So people might feel ownership or citizenship to a place that they only know on the internet. So we've got this virtual place that sits between the two. And the idea of really developing this concept that citizens will live elsewhere was really intriguing and something which clearly could be developed. And that virtual environment was really important because what it did was increased awareness and aspiration. It made these aspirational places to live. And they also were knowledge bases and provided all the information and entertainment. But the idea of promotion through a virtual environment was really, really important. So we ended up with 2 cities, one in Bangalore and one in Kuala Lumpur. Both had core values. Both had their own sort of core principles. And then one became a place about science. So Bangalore, building on its science background, became that, and Kuala Lumpur became about culture. So if we look at Kuala Lumpur was both Kuala Lumpur and Bangalore, the idea was compact cities, and I think that was the point I made earlier. So Bangalore, a very youthful space. It used to be the place where people retire. Now it's full of IT professionals doing great things, and that's a sort of typical image of Bangalore. And the other thing is New India, the idea that India is a salad bowl as opposed to a melting pot. So a melting pot, everyone merges together and becomes this universal thing. A salad bowl, everyone retains their own character and identity. So we looked at that and looked about how we can incorporate that, and developed a master plan, which was about a spine, had a very clear city centre, and worked its way out through a series of neighbourhoods. And the signature building in that was an arch building which represented the idea of healthy vertical urbanism. And the principles were that it was actually designed from the inside out, because anyone that's worked in India will understand about Vastu and Vastu ordering principles, and the idea that it's all about creating a sense of home and things should be in the right place. And we created a plan that was very linear, and there's no overlooking in this plan. Wherever you are, you're looking straight out with dual aspect apartments and good views. So as a result of that, we created a building which had no overlooking, allowed most apartments to be able to see the sunrise and the sunset, and created the idea of community through the generous use of public space and platforms and accommodation, and thought about things in a different way. Kuala Lumpur, if we think about modern Kuala Lumpur, it's actually based on tradition, based on the night markets and the centre, but it's got high ambitions in terms of its flagship projects. It takes national pride in some of the great buildings. But ultimately, residentially, it's about the kampung, which is a type of house and also a type of neighbourhood which is built around public space. So our site in Kuala Lumpur was actually all about valleys, of which there'd been a bit of land reclamation that had taken place. And that allowed us to naturally concentrate places at the confluence of valleys. And as a result of that, we developed a building topology, which was actually based on the traditional kampung house. And that's all to do with the fact that people related to it. People understood. That was the way in which Malaysians lived. And to actually impose an international approach to living, in the same way that imposing an international approach to Indian living actually was inappropriate. We needed to understand the way in which people lived. And as a result of that, we created density by creating a kampong culture, but by moving it into in upwards, we created public spaces that people could then relate to and then work their way through. And this created, in a way, a sort of quite a sensational building topology, which could be linked together, could have a very generous public space, or could sort of stand alone as a sort of pair of towers. So just coming back to where we started, I reiterate that the challenge is creating vertical urbanism that's sustainable by thinking about people and thinking about authenticity. And ultimately, I think that we should be thinking about the cities being not just about the product, the physical things, the buildings. It's also about the fact that it's a process, it's a work in progress. Cities are places where things happen, that people move through and things change, and you think about that working through. And I also think it's about, rather than sort of a top-down approach, it's a bottom-up approach where the people actually become empowered to work their way through and develop the city of their choice. And actually planning for change, and this is the important thing from the outset, will deliver sustainability, because the idea of adaptability, like any city, it can move and it can have an ebb and flow, actually allows vertical urbanism to evolve as its citizens evolve. And really, the other thing is to remember about everyday interactions and activities and the experience, and they're actually crucial to the way in which people will successfully inhabit. We've seen a lot of great projects over the last couple of days, and we'll see more tomorrow. But the real test is how people actually use those buildings. And it's the public space which actually truly cement the link between the city and the citizen. To say you're a citizen, often of any city, often you'll be relating to its public space, its squares, or its great civic areas. And ultimately, I'm arguing that thinking about the way in which we design for people, rethinking, the title of this session is Rethinking Urban Design. I'm arguing that we need to rethink the design team as well in terms of tackling bigger projects and being much more plural in our thought, rather than just tackling each project from the perspective of engineering and architectural and interior and landscape design. Think about anthropology, think about the people, think about those who can influence the way in which we think and actually deliver remarkable results.